companies like X, Elon Musk, because he allows free speech. They're attempting to censor the speech in the United States of U.S. citizens. That is blatantly not okay. And it is, I believe, it's a gray zone act of war and must end.
Carla Sands, thank you for talking.
Before we dive into the full story, you're about to see an interview that starts with the war in Ukraine, but quickly turns into something far more controversial. One of Donald Trump's top defenders, Carla Sands, is pressed on the administration's foreign policy before facing tough questions about Trump's repeated claims of defending free speech. And once that topic comes up, the interview takes a dramatic turn. Before we dive into the full story, comment where you're watching from. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Throughout this exchange, you'll see the interviewer refuse to let the key questions slide, repeatedly challenging whether Trump's actions actually match the principles he promotes. It's a tense back and forth that raises bigger questions about political consistency, accountability, and whether the same standards are being applied across the board. Stick around until the end, because that's where the most revealing part of the interview happens. After we watch the full clip, I'll break down exactly what stood out to me, explain why this exchange is generating so much debate, and share my perspective. With that said, let's get right into it.
So the new White House national security strategy talks about wanting Ukraine to survive as a viable state, but is being asked to give up territory that Ukraine holds to Russia compatible with being a viable state? I mean, do you think Donald Trump would regard himself as the leader of a viable state if he was asked to give up parts of Texas to Mexico?
But you're actually conflating two things, and this is irrelevant. The fact is that Ukraine has no pathway to win this war. President Trump and his team are attempting to, I believe, de-escalate this war and get this process on a good glide path to find first a ceasefire and then an end to the hostilities. He wants to make sure that Ukraine, and you can read that right in the national security strategy. It's not a long read. It's available publicly. It's a public document. So we can see that President Trump wants Ukraine to remain a sovereign nation, as he hopes the rest of Europe and the UK will remain sovereign nations. At America First Policy Institute, we look at the America First agenda and we say, let's have our allies have a nation first agenda, secure borders, controlled immigration, protection of the rule of law, affordable and abundant energy, protection of your beautiful culture, freedom of speech, if that's part of your constitution, the fact that every nation should put their citizens first, a credible defense, make sure that you can be a viable country and secure. We need that in every one of our allies.
Now, a big theme for Donald Trump is free speech. And in this new White House document, it accuses Europe of censorship of free speech and suppression of political opposition. But isn't that exactly what the Trump administration is doing in the United States? I'm thinking of how in September, President Trump celebrated ABC's suspension of the critic Jimmy Kimmel, his show. That was great news for America. And in July, Donald Trump filed that lawsuit against the Wall Street Journal and Rupert Murdoch over its reporting of his ties to Jeffrey Epstein. So it's OK for President Trump to limit free speech in the US, but not OK for that to happen in Europe.
Not at all. So free speech is the foundation of our shared, I would say especially UK and US, our shared values. How we got free speech in the United States was from the UK, from hundreds of years ago. And so if we can maintain that, we will be able to have open societies. Once you allow one side to decide what is acceptable speech and not acceptable speech, you have a totalitarian government, because then you will have no free exchange of ideas. And it is happening. Just in Ireland, Enoch Burke, a teacher, because he wouldn't use a student's pronouns. Sorry, he's been jailed now and he'll be in prison over Christmas.
Carla Sands, may I politely say that you're evading my question? And the question is that Donald Trump seems to be happy to go to courts to impose limits on free speech in your country and then lecture Europe about imposing limits on free speech over in Europe.
If he sues a network or entity, a newspaper, it's because they have done something that's broken the law. Otherwise, he wouldn't waste his time. He he absolutely works to maintain his reputation. He doesn't allow himself to be taken advantage of by these networks, and most of them have been working lockstep with the leftist Democrats in the United States.
But if you believe in free speech, if you believe in that, I think it's the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, that is an unequivocal principle. You stand by that. You don't go to the courts when you don't like what people are saying.
Well, when it's unfair or illegal activity, you do go to the courts. But absolutely, I would say most people who are part of the circle of America First do believe absolutely in free speech. We're really worried about this Digital Services Act that the EU has passed, because I do believe that that is a kind of war against the United States. They are working to fine companies like Elon Musk, because he allows free speech. They're attempting to censor the speech in the United States of U.S. citizens. That is blatantly not okay. And it is, I believe, it's a gray zone act of war and must end.
Carla Sands, thank you for talking.
So, after watching that entire exchange, here's what stood out to me. I genuinely found myself asking, are we all watching the same events? Because the contradiction at the center of this debate is hard to ignore. Donald Trump and many of his allies regularly describe themselves as defenders of free speech, while also taking legal action against certain critics and media organizations they believe have crossed the line. At the same time, they frequently accuse Europe and the UK of placing unacceptable limits on open debate. Whether you agree with that criticism or not, it's fair to ask whether the same standard is being applied consistently. That's exactly the question the interviewer kept coming back to. And in my opinion, it never received a direct answer. Instead of addressing the concern head-on, the conversation repeatedly shifted toward broader arguments about media bias and political opponents. For me, that's what made this interview so revealing. If you're going to present yourself as a champion of free expression, people are naturally going to examine whether your actions match your message. And that standard should apply to every politician, regardless of party or ideology. As for Carla Sands, I don't think her defense made the administration's position any stronger. If anything, the tougher the questions became, the more difficult it seemed to provide a clear and consistent response. But that's just my perspective. Now I want to hear yours. Do you think Donald Trump can credibly criticize other countries on free speech? Or do you think the interviewer exposed a genuine contradiction? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next political analysis. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.